A mariachi band?
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA. Ocala!
All right, 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Every time I hear a news story about the trouble between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, I often think to myself, am I getting a skewed view depending on who I'm listening to? And we have friends who are from Palestine who are Muslim. We have friends who have lived in Israel or spent time there anyway. Rabbi Hecht lived there a couple of years, didn't he?
Exactly.
And it doesn't seem like the people we know, whether they're Muslim or Jewish, it doesn't seem like they would ever be involved in any of the things that you hear in the news.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like they would. And I know they wouldn't. And yet, you scratch your head and you wonder why are these two groups of people not able to live peacefully? And my hope has always been that young people, with today's technology, to be able to communicate with one another, that today's young people will get on their Facebooks or whatever, and they'll say to their so-called adversaries, hey, you're not so bad. Gosh, I was led to believe you were going to be a horrible person, and you're pretty nice,
Mm-hmm.
And it would go both ways. And I don't know, I'm a Pollyanna, I guess. I believe, an idealist or whatever. So the one wish, and I even think I said this last week after John Kerry made some of his statements, and we had another debate moment here, not just here on the show, but on some of the bigger talk shows. And my wish that I actually said out loud was, I wish I could speak to somebody who really doesn't have a political agenda. Mm-hmm. And can talk about this intelligently, and can talk about it not from somebody who has researched it on the internet, but somebody who's lived there, lived through it. Is my wish being answered right now?
I think so.
Miko Peled is on the phone. He is an Israeli peace activist. He's the son of an Israeli general named Madi Peled. And forgive me, Miko, if I'm saying your name wrong. He's an inspirational speaker. He promotes justice, democracy, equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis. I know from the information that was handed to me that his niece was killed by a Hamas suicide bomber some years ago. Anyway, he's written a book called The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. It is a memoir, and I'm all ears from this point forward. Miko, thank you for being on the air with us today.
Sure, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show. I loved your opening. I love your introduction. You said a lot of good things.
I'm glad. I'm glad I did okay with that. So you
set it up.
So you're an American as well as an Israeli, is that right?
Yeah, I've been living here for a long time, so I'm dual citizen.
Are you in Israel right now?
And no, I'm in the U.S. I'm actually in Washington D.C. right now.
Okay.
But I go back and forth a lot. My family's there, and so on. But it's interesting because you started with saying, about having a skewed perspective. Everybody has a skewed perspective. When I start my talks, I always warn people up front. I tell them, my perspective is absolutely skewed. I'm not pretending to be unbiased. Everybody's biased. There's no perspective that is not biased on this issue. And so it's important to be honest about it. And of course, my perspective is skewed just like everybody else. My hope is, though, that my perspective at least makes sense, so that I can, people can accept it and perhaps, do the things that I think need to be done so that Israelis and Palestinians can live peacefully. And I agree with you; they can live peacefully. They should be able to live peacefully. But of course, we need to do two things. I think we need to, number one, reach out. We need to figure out what the problem is, and then we should never give up hope. We should really find the place where hope lies, and then pursue it with everything we've got. And I think that's where the solution is. And I think being an idealist, like you said about yourself, I get people telling me that I'm, idealistic and romantic and naive, and I think these are all very good things. This is exactly how you make things better, by being an idealist and naive and pursuing what you believe is right. So I liked your intro. I thought it was very, very much to the point. Very much to the point.
And at the same time, while we can be idealists, you really can't reason with unreasonable people. So, it's unreasonable. What is unreasonable is the notion that Israel does not have a right to exist. That's unreasonable. Israel does have a right to exist. So, but from that point,
well, I think.
Am I right? I mean, do you agree?
I would argue it this way. There's a reality today. The reality today is there are about 6 million Israeli Jews living in, whether you call it Palestine or Israel. I mean, it's the same country, just it has two names. But there are over 6 million Palestinians living there. And what is unreasonable is to expect that you could have a state that only serves half of the population. In other words, you cannot have a Jewish state when the majority of the population are not Jewish, because what happens then is you trample on the rights of the others. And since Israelis and Palestinians they're very segregated, but they live very close proximity. I mean, the country is very small. You can't expect the Palestinians to be willing to live under a regime that doesn't include them, a government that doesn't include them, that doesn't represent them, takes away their land, takes away their homes, denies them water, and so on.
Okay,
the question is not so much, I'll just finish my sentence. I'm saying the question is not so much whether Israel has the right to exist or not. The question is, how do we create an environment, a political environment where Israelis and Palestinians don't trample each other's rights, and can live together in peace.
What's going to happen now is you're going to realize how ignorant I am about this whole situation. So excuse that if you could, and I hope I'm not alone in this. I hope when you answer my questions that I'm not the only one who's in the dark about this, because I never heard that before, and I appreciate you telling me that. So the Palestinian living in Israel is not included in the social landscape, and is that right? And in what way are they not allowed to practice their religion?
No, it's a little bit more. It's a little more complicated than that, and you're not alone. And most people don't know about this, and it's far away, and there's a good reason why people don't know. The reality is this. The reality is the state of Israel exists on the entire country, which used to be called Palestine, now it's called Israel. Yeah. There are no two different countries. It's one country. It is Palestine, it is Israel, it is both. And the state that exists on that country is the state of Israel. It's a single state, calling itself the Jewish state, giving a preferential treatment, exclusive rights, if you will, for Jewish people like myself, at the expense of Palestinians. Before 75, 80 years ago, there was no state of Israel. It was Palestine, and Palestinians lived everywhere, and there was a small Jewish minority. Over the last 7 decades, many Jewish people immigrated. The Jewish state was created, and today we have 5 million Palestinian refugees who were thrown out of their homes, and their children who were thrown out of their homes, lost their land.
Right.
And now you've got the Jewish state, Jewish cities, Jewish towns, Jewish shopping malls, Jewish schools on their land. That is not something that can be sustained. That is not something that's okay. We've got 2 million people living in the Gaza Strip, and Israel denies them the right to travel, the right to do commerce, the right to have water, the right to have food, and the right to have access to medical care. That cannot be sustained.
Okay, and when you say that, I've heard stories like that too. And when I hear somebody get up, like an elected official, get up on a podium and they say, "I support the nation of Israel," I always say, "Well, gosh, I do too, but you can't make a blanket statement. You should support what is right." I don't even support the United States in everything. I mean, there's so many things this country does that I don't support. So I think it's almost like playing to somebody to say, "I support you, right or wrong," and I think we as a human race need to say, you know what? If North Korea's done something wrong, we need to be on the lookout. If Israel does something wrong, there's no way that everything they've done is right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, which is why it's so ridiculous when people are all up in arms when the U.S. Abstains from the UN vote. But the thing is this, we have a reality here where Israel, the state of Israel, which exists on what used to be Palestine, and gives exclusive rights and preferential treatments to Jews at the expense, people like myself, at the expense of Palestinians. And the reason I know this is because I'm an Israeli Jew. I was born and raised there as an Israeli Jew. As a a preferred customer, if you will. This is my state with beautiful, neighborhoods and nice homes and shopping malls and highways. And Palestinians who live, Israelis are never more than maybe 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away from Palestinians, live in an entirely different reality. They're denied water. Israel controls all the water. Palestinians only get 3% of the water. They're denied the right to travel. They are denied rights, period. They don't, most Palestinians don't even get to vote. So we have a reality here that is not acceptable, not sustainable. And what I did, which is why there's a book, I went from being the son of an Israeli general, of something of which I was very proud, and then I embarked on this journey from this reality, the sphere, if you will, that I was raised in, which is very privileged, into this other sphere, which, like I said, is no more than 10, 15 minutes away, where Palestinians live. And I couldn't believe it. They live they live under different laws, not just under different reality, not that only that they're not getting the same amount of water and the same rights. They live under completely different laws. If I get arrested for violating a law, I get a certain set of laws that govern what happens to me. A Palestinian has a completely different set of laws that govern, of course.
Really? I don't think I never heard that before, and I'm glad you're telling us. But how is it defined? I mean, could a Palestinian who says, "Okay, I'm just going to change my religion and become Jewish," would that change anything for that one individual?
You see, Israel doesn't see being Jewish as a religion. Israel sees being Jewish as a nationality.
Okay.
So, as Israeli Jews, all Israelis have to carry an ID, and the ID says Jewish or Arab.
Oh.
So they consider, and this was the premise for creating the Jewish state. With the creators of the Jewish state, they were called Zionists. They said they had their own ideology, which is called Zionism, and they said, well, Jews are not just a religion; Jews are a nation.
Right.
So, whereas before Jews always saw themselves as French or German or American or whatever, but they happened to have a Jewish religion, the Zionists said, no. Jews are a nation. The Bible is our history book, and Palestine is our country. And that was the movement that eventually brought Israel into creation. And they did this at the expense of the Palestinians. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, almost 1 million Palestinians were thrown out of their homes into refugee camps. And their villages and towns, hundreds of them, were destroyed. And towns and cities and farms and shopping malls and highways were built, but for Jews only. That was the reality. So today, now let me just finish the sentence, that the laws that established, the very first laws that were passed by the newly created State of Israel, defined the land as belonging to Jews. And then, which means that Palestinians, who are not part of this Jewish nation, are denied rights. They're denied right to the land, to the water, to travel, to return, and so forth.
So is there a solution? Do you have an idea of what would solve the problem? That just sounds like, first of all, that would be unheard of in America. That's just so. That's the America of the pre-Civil War days. Okay, so
pre-Civil War and pre-end of Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was a very similar thing.
Right.
You're right, and so of course there's a solution. Like I said earlier, I think those of us that live around the world who are as they say, rich, free, and alive all at the same time, we cannot afford to say there's no hope. We cannot afford to say, oh, these people, they're killing each other forever. There's nothing we can do. Of course there's something we can do. We need to look at some very, very basic things. The population are about half and half, with a slight majority to Palestinians right now, although Palestinians have more children, so they'll probably become a majority pretty soon. The only way to move forward to Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace, can live like normal human beings, is a reality where they have equal rights, where it's a state of all of its citizens. It cannot be a Jewish state in an Arab country unless you are infringing on the rights of the Palestinian people, and of course they're not going to stand for it. So the thing to do is to tear down the wall, tear down the military, the military presence, the Israeli military presence, allow for equal rights, allow for voting rights, one person, one vote, and change this from being a Jewish state into the state of all of its people. And of course, some of the people are Palestinians, and so it's going to reflect that. That is the only way. So the thing, when you said earlier, does Israel have a right to exist? In its present format, a Jewish state does not have the right to exist when more than half the population are not Jewish. It has to be the state of all of its people, with equal rights for everyone, with equal opportunities for everyone, and with equal privilege for everyone and responsibility. That is the only way to move forward.
Does the name of the country matter? I'm guessing some people will say yes. It has to be called Israel, right?
Well, I think it matters a lot, but it cannot be called Israel because more than half of the population are not Jewish and they're not going to accept it. 70 years ago, until about 70 years ago, the country was called Palestine.
Right.
So Palestinians are going to want it. So they're either going to have to call it both, or they're going to have some kind of referendum. There are ways to do this. I mean, the England is called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. There are lots of different ways to go about this. How you call what the names that you're going to use, the flag you're going to use. But the thing is, they're going to have to decide this together, and nothing is going to happen. The Israelis and Palestinians have never had the opportunity to actually, as equals, decide their fate. It's always been Israel with its massive army and Palestinians with stones, which doesn't work. You're going to have Israelis and Palestinians as complete equals, deciding their fate, deciding their government, deciding everything else. So these are big things to decide.
Can I ask you to paint a picture with words of what would happen to me if I was a Palestinian and I was suspected of stealing a donut from a donut shop?
In Israel?
In Israel, yes. And then my next door neighbor is a Jewish person in Israel, and he steals a donut from a donut shop. Would we be treated differently? And
absolutely.
Based on what?
Absolutely. Well, again, you see the way Israel created this very complicated web of laws is, I'll give you a snippet. I'll just give you like a glance. All right. So Israelis, regardless of Israeli Jews, regardless of where they live within that country, are governed by the same civil, pretty liberal democratic laws. Palestinians are governed by laws depending on what part of the country they live in. So you've got the West Bank, you've got the Gaza Strip, you've got what's called 1948 Palestine, which is, these are Palestinians who have some sort of Israeli citizenship. You've got the Palestinians in Jerusalem who are considered resident aliens. And the laws that govern their lives and the laws that will determine what happened if they stole a donut are determined by where they live. It's a very, very complicated bureaucracy. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a real life example, okay? So I'm an activist, and I go to protest, and I go with my Palestinian friends to protest for their rights when their land is being taken, when their water sources are being taken, and so forth by Jewish settlers. So I get arrested, which happens quite often. You go to a protest, the army comes, they shoot us, they shoot at us, and so forth. They're very violent, and then we get arrested. As an Israeli, I get arrested. I get taken to the police station. A report is done. I get questioned, and I go home. A few months later, I get a letter that they either drop charges or, on rare occasion, they might actually prosecute. A couple of years later, I go to trial, and usually I get acquitted or I get some kind of a symbolic fine. A Palestinian in the exact same spot for the exact same violation, the army will handcuff, shackle, blindfold them, and beat them before anything ever happens and throw them into a cell. How long they stay in the cell, in the jail cell, is determined by the mood of a local army officer. Now, they will not be allowed to see a lawyer. Now, listen carefully. They will not be allowed to see an attorney until they confess.
Oh, my.
Once they confess, which usually involves, days and days and days of what they call administrative detention. In other words, they're detained without charge, which means that they are being beaten and they are being tortured and they are being held under very, very difficult conditions. And some of these Palestinians, by the way, are minors, but Israel doesn't care. Some of them are 12 years old, but Israel doesn't care. Then after 20, 21, 28 days, they might be allowed to see an attorney for an hour, and then usually their detention is extended until some officer decides, well, we're going to let them go, or until whatever information they wanted. It's an entirely different system. It's an entirely different reality.
Wow.
Thank you, Jews and for Palestinians.
What changed your father? Your father became a peace activist after being a general. Was there any one event that he witnessed?
In the book I talk about that because that is one of the questions that people ask a lot. How is it that a general who was so instrumental in pushing for the wars that Israel engaged in and pushing for the conquest and building this Israeli army suddenly turned around? He didn't think he turned around. What he said this. After 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, and what most Israelis considered kind of finishing the job of taking, what they felt belonged to them because it's part of the land of Israel, he stood up and he said, you know what, there is another nation living here. We need to consider some of their rights. We need to allow them some sort of independence. What we should do is allow them to establish a state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and they will have their own Palestinian Arab state. We still have the majority of the country. They'll have a small state, and we can make peace with them. So he thought he was just doing what is best for the state of Israel, because he said, if we don't do this, then 40, 50 years from now, there will not be a Jewish state. We will be fighting terrorism because they're going to resist, and we're going to call it terrorism. All of our resources are going to be used to fight the Palestinians, and it's not going to be a Jewish state, and it's not going to be a democracy, which is what John Kerry referred to, because it's going to be a state of two people, but only one people govern. One side governs the other. That is not a democracy, and that is not what he believed was right.
Miko, let me because of the time, I just want to tell the listeners the book is called The General's Son. It's written by our guest Miko Peled, Peled, and Miko is Miko, Miko Peled. Real quickly, I wanted to ask you this: what are your thoughts, if any, about how the United States' relationship with Israel and Palestine will change with Donald Trump taking office?
I don't think it's going to change much. I don't think, Israel has a full blanket, 1,000% support from the United States. And no president has been more supportive of Israel in money, in weapons, and in just blanket, international diplomatic support than the outgoing President Obama. So I think the difference will be in style. I think whereas perhaps Obama had a different style, a different relationship with the Israeli Prime Minister, Donald Trump is a little more flamboyant and outlandish. And the thing is, we don't really know what he's going to do. But in terms of support for Israel, you can't get any more supportive than it already is. Israel was just awarded a $38 billion foreign aid package, and Israel is a rich country that doesn't need foreign aid. And the first F-35s, the most modern warplane in the history of the world, just landed in Israel, that Israel just got from the U.S. So Israel is getting all the support and will probably continue until such time that Americans demand they don't want to give their money anymore to a country that doesn't deserve it, and the country that violates human rights and so forth. So I think our work is cut out for us.
And you've seen all sides, because you yourself were in the army over there. You saw your grandfather and your father, and then you were able to leave when you became a medic. Did that change anything in your heart?
Well, the first cracks in my, I was very patriotic, a real believer, and so on. And I joined the military. I volunteered, happily to serve in special forces and all the kind of stuff that a good young man needs to do. But as I was in the service, I realized how we treat the Palestinians, as occupiers, and I was quite frankly shocked, because when you live a civilian life, you don't really know. You don't see it and you don't experience it. So that was the first crack. And then later on, once I actually embarked on the journey into Palestinian cities, Palestinian towns, and so on, and reached out and made friendships and so forth with Palestinians, I realized the injustice here is so grave, it cannot be justified. You cannot justify this injustice by saying the Jews suffered the Holocaust and all the kinds of excuses that people give. What we need to do is we need to create an environment where everybody is safe and where everybody feels secure and where everybody feels that their rights are respected. And a single democracy, a real democracy with equal rights, is really the only solution, the only way that we don't trample over the rights of others.
Well said.
The book, I found it on Amazon. It's got 255 reviews and it's like 4.5 stars. So it looks like a lot of people are really liking the book. I actually thought I was going to see some, because it seems like it would have those who loved it and those who hated it. And it looks like you have, 1 star. Somebody gave it, and that could be because it was delivered, with a tear in the package.
Yeah.
But 80% of the people who read it gave it 5 stars, and that's really pretty good. The book.
Yeah, and I got Alice Walker. The great Alice Walker wrote the foreword. She was very gracious and wrote the foreword. So that's a beautiful feather in our hat.
That is very, very much so.
Miko, thank you for being on the air with us and for sharing this with us. It really was something I wanted, was somebody like yourself to kind of give me the real story of what's going on over there. Miko Peled, again, Miko Peled. Go to Amazon. It's where I found it, The General's Son. And you also have a website of your own, MikoPeled.com, and thegeneralsson.com, right? Thegeneralsson.com?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Again, thank you for sharing that with us. And for the listeners, if you want to share the interview, we'll put this up as a podcast. today by 2:00.
Yes.
Thank you, Miko.
Thank you so much.
All right,
Happy New Year.
We will be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. The 115th Congress will be sworn in at noon local time. The vice president-elect with a preview of top goals.
Focus on repealing and replacing Obamacare. We'll look forward to legislation that will give us the tools to roll back the avalanche of red tape and regulation that have been stifling American jobs and growth.
Governor Pence speaking at Trump Tower.
House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi describing Republicans as bulls in a china shop.
You break it, you own it.
Republicans are expected to try to repeal parts of the law right away.
Fox Radio's Rachel Sutherland. The president-elect also tweeting some criticism at members of his own party after House Republicans voted to gut the Independent Office of Congressional Ethics, stressing that tax reform and health care should be higher priorities. And Toyota beginning to move hundreds of jobs out of its northern Kentucky headquarters, part of a nationwide consolidation. Fox News. We report, you decide.
And now, Geico saving stories. Nikki Peasley was happily married to Scott. However, something between them changed after Scott spent 15 minutes on Geico.com.
Constant gifts, chocolates, flowers, like he discovered a cash tree.
Cash tree, indeed. Unbeknownst to Nikki, Scott had saved hundreds of dollars on their car insurance by switching to Geico.
His gifts never stop.
Geico. Spend 15 minutes and 15% or more in savings could be gifted to you.
Pay fast with the Master Pass. Don't buy it. Master Pass it. Pay fast with the Master Pass. Simple and easy. Pay fast with the Master Pass. Don't buy it. Master Pass it. Pay fast with the Master Pass. Secure and so easy.
MasterPass, the simple, secure way to pay from MasterCard. Accepted at select